CJ Peterson, and welcome to The Journey is Real. We talk to real people with real passions who share a real portion of their heart. Today, my guest is Ed Gangi, and we've titled his podcast, The Unexpected Story of Adoption. Thank you for coming on today, Ed.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, CJ. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. You have a unique story. Would you please share with the listeners, the story behind the podcast title? And you can go back as far as you need to, because on The Journey is Real, we like to follow the journey that brought you to where you are.
Sure. Well, I'm approaching my 73rd birthday now, and I was adopted at birth. My adoptive parents brought me home the day after I was born. I knew through my childhood that I was adopted, even though my parents and I never had a conversation about it that I recall. I kind of discovered some paperwork at one point, and it explained one kind of awkward statement my mother had made at a given point, and I never questioned it. I never asked them. They never offered anything to me, and sadly, my adoptive father passed away in the 1970s, my mother in the 1980s. And it wasn't until 2017 that I just got the inkling that, okay, it's time to find out where I came from. Mm-hmm. And I probably spurred by the number of adoption and family search type TV shows that were out there, and the ancestries of the world, it seemed like it became a simpler process. And I began my search and very quickly began to reveal my birth mother's identity. I had always assumed that she was a high school girl who, went out and stayed out too late one night and came home with a problem. And I found out that was not the case. Through a series of very fortunate events, I learned that my adoptive mother was a celebrity performer with the big ice shows of the 1940s and the cool. 1950s. And and how I discovered that was really quite interesting. She had her given name, she adopted a stage name, and then 7 years after I was born, got married. And I found a copy of her marriage license, which gave me still another name to search. And I ultimately found that she and her husband, who she had married, formed a company after they both stopped performing that created props for the ice skating and the show business industry. And when I Googled the name, first thing that came up was the blog for an antiques dealer down in Atlanta, Georgia. And she had a series of photographs of my mother online. And she had a copy of her middle school diploma and a copy of her first ever professional contract. And that was, as you can imagine, that was rather stunning.
So I have a question.
Yes,
how did you find out your birth mother's name?
My adoption, stepping back, was privately arranged. And that's again, a part of a rather unique story. This goes back to the baby scoop era, where so many young women who found themselves pregnant were taken into homes and had babies taken from them and placed for adoption. That was not my case. My birth mother managed her pregnancy largely in secret. She never told her parents. Only her oldest sister and her sister's husband knew. And through a series of coincidences, they came in touch with my adoptive parents, who were looking to adopt a baby. Mm-hmm. And so my parents had my adoption decree with my birth mother's name on it.
Oh, okay.
So that was
a little easier than trying to just.
It made it much easier, yes. And this has been a story of happy coincidences and good luck. And that was probably the first lucky charm. Mm-hmm. So, when I contacted the antiques dealer down in Georgia, and she had purchased this information or this memorabilia several years prior at an auction. And, knowing the nature of the business, I assumed she probably had brought it home and then pieced it out and sold it. Mm-hmm. But I sent her a message, and I said, I'm exploring a possible relationship. Do you still have these things? And she wrote right back and said, yes, I do. But I'm very busy right now. Can I call you later? Yeah, certainly. And later came and she didn't call, and tomorrow came and she didn't call. And after about a week, I decided, okay, later is different from everybody. But but I was getting impatient by that point, especially knowing she still had those things.
Mhm.
So I sent her another message, and this time there's no pretense. It was, that woman is my mother. I would like to talk to you. And she called back within 5 minutes. And
Oh, wow.
she said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I forgot all about this." She said, "You need to come here now," which was kind of a remarkable statement. We're in North Carolina. And
Say North Carolina to Georgia. Okay.
yeah, so we didn't make it just right now, but probably a week later, we were on the road and on the way.
Mhm.
And, and she and her husband came to our hotel carrying a big carton which contained all of this memorabilia. Her husband walked in after parking the car carrying a shield and a sword a la Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And it turned out that those were a couple of the pieces of the props that
Oh,
that
okay.
came out of their studio. And we spent a good deal of time with them, and they were just wonderful, wonderful people and so generous. And my wife and I were debated on the way down. Well, how much are we willing to pay for these things if they'll sell them? And we had we sort of decided, whatever they want, we'll give them. And when it came time, I was writing down some names off of some promotional pictures, some pictures of other skaters who I thought might lead me to my mother, who I
Yeah,
didn't
because if she was
realize.
intertwined in that, they would probably have kept
Yeah,
in touch.
right. There's actually one picture there that said, to the best roommate ever. And I figured,
That's a
okay,
definite connection.
best roommate ever would certainly be a good clue. And when, when the dealer's husband saw me writing these names down, he said, "What are you doing?" And I explained what my thought process was. He said, "You don't need to do that." He said, "This all belongs to you. We've just been holding it for you."
Oh, that's very
And
sweet.
and they just gave it to us,
Oh,
you
that's
know,
awesome.
and they're just wonderful, generous people. And and they were the first people in my acknowledgments when I wrote my book that I recognized, because they made so much possible. Number one, sheer good luck, and number two, by their generosity. But
Yeah, I'm sure that opened tons of doors. Now, were you able to find her? Was she still alive when you found her?
no, I did ultimately determine that she and her family had lived in Georgia, in the Atlanta area, and then they moved subsequently down into rural Georgia, probably 50 miles south of Atlanta. And she had passed away 3 years before I started my search. And and I don't live with a lot of regrets, but I think one of the things I do regret is probably having not started 3 years earlier.
Mhm.
I would like to have met her. I would like to have told her that that everything worked out for the best, and I appreciated the decision she made, which had to be a terribly difficult one.
I'm sure. Now, are there any other family members you're able to connect with?
Yeah, there were. On her side, there was a maternal half brother,
Hmm.
and I did make contact with him. Ultimately, it took a little bit of work to get there, and then a little bit of work to convince him that he and I were actually half brothers. He kept on asking me on probably 3 or 4 different occasions, "Okay, now tell me again, what kind of kin are we?"
Hmm.
And I would explain that we had the same mother, we had different fathers, and
So that's kind of cool. You went from having no siblings to a half brother.
to a half brother. And before I even started the process of searching for my mother, I had done an ancestry DNA test. I started my search in February, I believe, and had sent in my DNA sample in January, so the month prior. And because they get so backed up at the holidays, my results didn't come until May. But when those results came, I did it just to find out what's my ethnicity.
Hmm.
But when the results came, there was one person at the top of the list whose name I did not recognize. And it turned out that he was my paternal half brother. And and that led me to learn the identity of, obviously, of my birth father,
So you
who
get to
I
learn the other side of the story as well.
correct. Yep.
I've been surprised. There's been a lot of people who have found their parents, whether they were given up for adoption, whether the parent, sometimes the male counterpart had no clue.
I don't believe
a lot of times that happens, that they've been able to connect with their children, with their parent that way. They didn't even know existed. The parents like,
Yeah, I have no doubt but that my birth father did not know about me at all.
Mm-hmm.
My mother in August of 1947, which is when I was conceived, was skating with the Ice Follies, and the Ice Follies would summer over in San Francisco from June through September. And during the day, they would practice their coming season, and at night they would perform the current season. She had a summer romance. My birth father never left San Francisco. So, it was just a
now, did you get to
perfect.
meet him, or was he already passed?
Now, he had already passed away. He was older than my mother was by 6 or 7 years, I think. So he had already passed away several years earlier.
Did you gain any family from that side?
Well, as I said, I found a paternal half brother.
Okay.
And and he was very welcoming, and he gave me all sorts of insight. But he, in our first conversation, said, "You know what? I'm not sure who your adoptive parents were, but I suspect you probably did better with them than you would have had my father been your father," which is kind of a sad thing to have to admit.
Mm-hmm.
He was, I'm told he was a very compulsive, impetuous man.
Mm-hmm.
He was between his second and third wives out of 5 at the time I was conceived. So, he's obviously, he had some level of attraction to him.
Mm-hmm.
It was,
I was adopted, but I knew my birth family, and I know obviously my adopted family. And the way I look at it is, my adoptive family chose me. And so they did it with a purpose and an intent. They chose me. And so they look after me and love me and care for me, and, more than anybody I think ever could. And it's like, when you have the mindset of, not by blood, but by heart, it kind of gives it a different perspective.
well, it comes into that question of nature and nurture.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm sure there are things about me that come from my birth parents.
Mm-hmm.
But, who I am and what I am and everything I've done, it comes from the people who raised me. My adoptive parents could not have loved a natural child more than they loved me. And
that brings, something close to your heart.
Absolutely.
So have any passions arisen from this in particular incident?
Well, the passion that arose was, I wrote a 355-page book about it. And I never expected a story.
Mm-hmm.
I never intended to write a book. But, the more I found, the more there was to record. I initially started just going to a bi-weekly memoir session at one of our local libraries.
Mm-hmm.
And just to tell about the process I went through trying to hunt people down and trying to learn where they were. And then as I started to uncover the story of my birth mother, I started writing a second piece, which was her story.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know there are a lot of people who are, hurt or angry about the rejection that they might feel by having been surrendered for adoption. And I came up with something totally opposite. It was a terribly difficult decision she made, and it was a decision she made for herself and for me. It was not an era that was welcoming to unwed mothers, with a baby on their hip.
Mm-hmm. Now, your book is titled "The Best Gift Given." So
the book is the gift.
Can you kind of give us a general premise? I mean, obviously it's your story, but is it your perspective, her perspective? Kind of, if we were to open it up, what would we be looking at?
Well, what you're going to find are 2 intertwined stories. One is pure memoir, and it's written in first person.
Mm-hmm.
and it's interwoven with my mother's story, uh, which is narrative nonfiction. So it's basically written in third person, and it talks in terms of Genevieve did this. Genevieve was my birth mother. She did this. She saw this. She was in a given place, and the other people that she was with, and it's very, very correct from the standpoint of chronology in terms of the sequence of events in the 5 years from the time she left her home. And she left home at the age of 17.
Oh, wow.
And she traveled alone by train in the midst of World War II, and traveled from New York City to Vancouver, British Columbia, to join kind of a second tier ice show, a traveling ice show. And then, she
I
was
mean,
just,
that's huge for back then.
oh, it was, for a girl at the age of 17.
Yeah. For a girl
And
anyway, but a girl at the age of
yeah,
17 in 1947 is like, wow, that's brave.
yeah. Well, this was 1942 actually.
Sorry, 42.
And, I guess the other thing that some people find incredulous is her parents let her go. But she was determined. She was going to have a career as an ice performer, and she realized her dreams. So if I've taken nothing away, it's it's the value of having a focus and some level of determination. So it tells her story from the time she left home, how she quote unquote got discovered to give her that opportunity, through the time that she came back to New York City unknown to anybody but her sister, managed that time there until she gave birth to me, and how they came to the decision, or she came to the decision to place me for adoption.
Now, for people who want to find you online, how can they find you?
Well, I can be found online on my website. It's www.digangiauthor.com, and I'll spell that. It's DIGANGI author.com. The book, you can purchase the book there or read about the book on the website. And the book is available through any major bookseller or independent bookseller, through my website, or through any of the online retailers. And I'll take the opportunity to just hold the book up.
For those who are watching, or for those who are listening, he's holding up the best gift given.
It's the gift best given.
Gift best given. Sorry.
Right.
The gift best given book. And he said you can find it online. You can probably find it on Amazon.
It's certainly on Amazon. I think that's everybody's biggest bookstore these days.
Pretty much. But there's on Amazon. You can find it on his author page. We have about 3 to 5 minutes left. Is there anything you would like to add?
Well, I think, there are lots of different feelings, I think, from people in the adoptee community. And I think maybe the variations come based on age. Older folks who got caught up in that baby scoop era feel differently than younger people who've been involved in the open adoption era. I think, my feeling is, if you have any anger, any jealousy, any, anxiety, give it a chance. Be sympathetic to the people who placed you in the position you're in. And, and if you've got things you're having trouble dealing with, find somebody who you can talk to and who can help you with that. And there are lots of support groups out there. My mother, I think, just was on the leading edge of open adoption. She had a very specific list of who my adoptive parents should be or what they should possess. And
very strong from what you're telling me, and very confident in herself and what.
Absolutely so. Absolutely. She was focused, and she, there's a piece in the book where she goes and she talks with her sister and her brother-in-law, and they're sort of the mindset that, okay, you're going to have to give this baby up. And she sort of takes it, not so quickly. I've got a list of things. And, when push came to shove, I wound up with all of them, and that's what she wanted. And that's why I would so much have liked to have to have met her to just tell her, you did good.
It sounds like she has a lot of spunk. So
yeah, and everybody who I met, who knew her, she was held in very high regard, just as as an excellent performer, a focused person, and a good person, a very generous person.
Yeah, no, I always go, as the author, I always say there are three sides to every story. There's the one side, the other side, and the truth is somewhere in the middle.
That's exactly right.
You never know what that person was going through at that time. You've never walked in somebody else's shoes. From the opposite end of the story, I look at it as, my adoptive family loved me and actually taught me what real love was like.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a gift that I can only pass forward. Do I have negativity toward my other family? A little, but it's not for the reason that you think.
Right.
So, just for those who are adopted, kind of try to put yourself in the shoes of the one who gave you up for adoption. You don't know what they were going through. You don't know why they made the choice that they made. 9 out of 10 times, it was probably not for selfish reasons.
No, precisely. And I plan on writing a follow-up to this book, and it will center very much on what my birth mother dealt with as she went through life afterwards. Mm-hmm. And, because I think that's a burden that you always carry. As a matter of fact, today on social media, I posted a picture of her, which I cropped out of a visa application that she filled out 9 months after I was born. And it was the only time I've seen her not on and not smiling. She just looks so sad and so solemn. And I can't help but wonder what she was thinking when that picture was taken.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing your heart and sharing your story today, Ed. We really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you, CJ.
Again, for those who'd like to find out more about Ed Gangi and his story, you can find him at www.degangieauthor.com. That's www.digangiauthor.com. And again, thank you for coming on today. And thank you for listening to The Journey is Real. We talk to real people with real passions who share a real portion of their hearts. I'm CJ Peterson of cjpetersonwrites.com. Until next time.